an empire that began as a small tribe of shepherds in Anatolia and ended up ruling 3 continents for over 600 years. A story of great sultans, brilliant military leaders, the invincible Janissary soldiers, and naval fleets that dominated the seas. The story of the Ottoman Empire, the last great Islamic caliphate in history. But our story does not begin in golden Istanbul or the luxurious palaces of Topkapi. It begins in the heart of Anatolia, in a small land no larger than a medium-sized city today, with a man named Osman at the beginning of the 14th century. At that time, Anatolia was divided among dozens of small Turkish emirates, each fighting the others and all fighting the crumbling Byzantine Empire. Among these emirates was a very small one in northwestern Anatolia, ruled by a man named Ertuğrul. Ertuğrul was the leader of a Turkish tribe that had fled Central Asia to escape the Mongol invasion. His family was not of noble or princely descent. They were merely shepherds and warriors. But Ertuğrul was a wise man. He understood that the future in this new land required more than just herding and fighting. It required vision, patience, and political acumen. When Ertuğrul died, his son Osman inherited an emirate no larger than a few thousand square kilometers and an army of no more than 400 warriors. Any businessman today would start with a startup larger than Osman's first empire. But Osman carried in his heart a dream far greater than the size of his emirate. Osman's dream came to him in a vision. He saw himself sitting under a giant tree, its branches spreading to cover the entire earth. Rivers flowed from beneath its shade, great cities grew around it, and millions of people of all races and colors lived in peace and justice under its leaves. This dream would change the course of human history. Osman understood that the dream was not just a vision, but a plan of action. He began to expand gradually, but in a way different from the other Turkish princes. Instead of relying solely on force, he relied on justice and tolerance. When he conquered a city, he did not plunder or destroy it, he protected and developed it. Christians and Jews under his rule enjoyed freedom of worship and trade. This wise policy made people prefer Ottoman rule over that of the Byzantines or other Turkish princes. Entire cities asked Osman to rule them rather than fight them. This is what businessmen today call organic growth. Osman built his empire on goodwill and trust before the sword and force. But the greatest challenge lay ahead. The Byzantine Empire, though weakened compared to its former glory, it still controlled Constantinople, the greatest city in the world, and the city that controlled trade between Europe and Asia. Osman was wise enough to know he was not yet ready to attempt the conquest of Constantinople. Instead, he focused on consolidating his rule in Anatolia, building a strong army, and, most importantly, raising his sons to be better leaders than himself. Orhan, Osman's son, inherited the emirate as a young man in his early 20s, but he also inherited his father's vision and ambition. Orhan was the first to call himself Sultan, and the first to mint coins in the name of the Ottoman state. But his greatest achievement was the establishment of the Janissary army. The idea of the Janissaries was revolutionary for its time. Instead of relying on soldiers who fought for money or their tribes, Orhan established an army of soldiers who fought only for Islam and the state. These soldiers were selected at a young age, trained for many years, and lived like warrior monks. They did not marry, own land, or think of anything but war and jihad. The Janissaries would become the most formidable military force in the world for 3 consecutive centuries. But Orhan also understood that military power alone was not enough to build a lasting empire. Empires are built on economy, trade, and science. Therefore, he encouraged merchants to settle in his lands, built markets and caravanserais, and developed trade routes. Under his rule, Bursa became the most important commercial center in Anatolia. The most significant development during Orhan's reign was the crossing into Europe. Around 1350, Ottoman armies crossed the Dardanelles for the first time and captured the fortress of Gallipoli in Europe. This small crossing would change the map of the world. The Europeans did not initially take the Ottoman threat seriously. The Byzantine Empire thought these Turks were merely raiders who would return to Asia after plundering. Other European kingdoms were busy with their internal wars, but Murad I, Orhan's son, laid the foundations of the Ottoman Empire in Europe with patience and method. Murad I was the first Ottoman sultan to focus his expansion on Europe more than Asia. He captured Edirne and made it his European capital, then began expanding into the Balkans. His approach was clever and calculated. He did not destroy the cities he conquered, but turned them into bases for further expansion. He had an extraordinary ability to win the hearts of the local people. Orthodox Christians in the Balkans, suffering from persecution by the Catholic Church, found greater freedom to practice their faith under Ottoman rule. Peasants found more justice in Ottoman law than under feudal rule. This wise policy made the Ottoman expansion in the Balkans rapid and relatively easy. Within 2 decades, the Ottomans controlled most of Bulgaria, southern Serbia, and Macedonia. Europe finally realized that this was not just a passing invasion, but a new power that had come to stay. In 1389, the Battle of Kosovo took place, one of the most famous battles in European history. A large Christian alliance led by the Serbian prince Lazar Hrebeljanović faced the Ottoman army led by Murad I. The battle was fierce and bloody, ending in a decisive Ottoman victory, but at a high cost. During the battle, a Serbian knight named Miloš Obilić pretended to surrender and convert to Islam, asking to meet Sultan Murad. As he approached, he pulled out a hidden dagger and stabbed the Sultan. Murad died instantly, but the Ottoman soldiers killed the assassin immediately. Murad I's death at the moment of victory was a shock to the Ottoman army, but his son Bayezid, who was commanding a wing of the army, proved himself his father's son. The first thing he did was kill his younger brother Yaqub to prevent any succession conflict. This harsh decision caused great controversy, but it prevented a civil war that would have destroyed the nascent state. Bayezid I earned the nickname Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, for the speed of his military campaigns. Within 10 years, he expanded the Ottoman Empire more than any sultan before him. He conquered most of Anatolia, reached the walls of Constantinople, and controlled most of the Balkans. The Europeans called him the terror of the world. But Bayezid was also the first Ottoman sultan to face a challenge on the scale of his empire. From the east emerged Timur, the Mongol conqueror, who controlled most of Asia from India to Russia. Timur sent Bayezid a provocative message demanding his submission. Bayezid's arrogant and reckless response was, "I submit to no one but God." This reply enraged Timur, who decided to teach the young sultan a lesson he would never forget. In 1402, the two armies met at the Battle of Ankara, one of the largest battles in Asian history. The Ottoman army was massive, but Timur was smarter and more experienced. He used clever psychological tactics. He bribed some Turkish commanders, spread rumors in the Ottoman army, and attacked when the Ottomans were tired and thirsty. The result was catastrophic. The Ottoman army collapsed and Bayezid was captured. Timur treated his captive sultan with contempt, carrying him in an iron cage like an animal. Bayezid died in captivity a year later, his heart and spirit broken. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire seemed inevitable. Bayezid's 4 sons began a brutal civil war known as the Interregnum, or the Dark Period. Each brother killed the other, and each claimed to be the legitimate sultan. For 10 years, the Ottoman Empire disintegrated like cotton, and it seemed that Osman's dream had ended forever. But Mehmed the Conqueror, Bayezid's youngest son, proved to be the strongest and wisest. One by one, he defeated and killed his brothers, reunifying the empire. When he became the sole sultan in 1413, he was no older than 25, but he inherited a shattered and ruined empire. Rebuilding the Ottoman Empire required patience, wisdom, and rare political acumen from Mehmed the Conqueror. He did not attempt to expand or conquer, but focused all his efforts on internal reform, reorganizing the army, repairing the economy, establishing justice, and restoring the people's trust in the Ottoman system. After 10 years of wise rule, Mehmed left his son Murad II a strong and stable empire. Murad II continued his father's work and began expanding again. He regained most of the lands lost during the Civil War, resumed the siege of Constantinople, and defeated a large crusader campaign at the Battle of Varna. But Murad II's greatest achievement was raising his son, Mehmed. This young boy would become one of the greatest leaders in human history, the man who would fulfill Osman's dream of conquering Constantinople after 150 years of his great-grandfather's death. Mehmed II became sultan at the age of just 19 in 1451. Everyone underestimated him because of his youth, The Byzantines, the Europeans, and even some Ottoman ministers thought this young man would be nothing more than a puppet in the hands of the Grand Viziers. But they were all wrong. Mehmed II was a rare military and political genius. He spoke 7 languages, studied history, philosophy, mathematics, and engineering, and read the biographies of Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Saladin. But most importantly, he carried in his heart a single dream: the conquest of Constantinople. In the mid-15th century, Constantinople was a pale shadow of its former glory. The city that once housed 1 million people now had no more than 50,000. Entire neighborhoods lay in ruins, and the Byzantine Empire controlled little more than the city and its immediate suburbs. But Constantinople was still the greatest fortress in the world, surrounded on 3 sides by water and protected on the land side by a massive wall built by Emperor Theodosius 1,000 years earlier. This wall had withstood dozens of sieges throughout history. The Arabs besieged the city twice and failed to break it. The Bulgars, Russians, and Seljuk Turks tried repeatedly and failed. Even the Crusaders, who managed to occupy the city in 1204, entered through treachery and conspiracy, not by breaking the wall. But Mehmed II possessed a weapon that none of the previous conquerors had: cannons. At that time, cannons were a relatively new invention, and most were small and weak. But Mehmed II brought in a Hungarian engineer named Urban, who had been expelled from Constantinople because the Byzantines could not afford his salary. Urban built Mehmed a giant cannon weighing 17 tons, requiring 100 oxen to pull it, and firing stone balls, each weighing over 1,000 pounds. This giant cannon, named Muhammad by the Ottomans, was capable of demolishing any wall in the world. On April 6, 1453, the final siege of Constantinople began. His army was massive, over 100,000 warriors, a fleet of over 100 ships, and dozens of large cannons. Against this huge army, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine V had fewer than 10,000 soldiers, most of whom were foreign volunteers. The siege lasted 53 days. Every day the Ottoman cannons pounded the city's walls, and the Byzantine defenders repaired them at night. The defenders' morale was high at first, supported by faith, courage, and love of country. But as the weeks passed, the situation became hopeless. Constantine V, the last Byzantine emperor, was a brave and noble man. He refused all of Mehmed II's offers to surrender in exchange for his life and wealth. On the last night before the final assault, he delivered a moving speech to his soldiers. "The empire has lost everything. Only this city remains. As for me, I will die with it." At dawn on May 29th, the final Ottoman assault began. Thousands of soldiers poured through the breaches in the broken wall, and fierce fighting erupted in the city's streets. Constantine V removed his imperial insignia and fought as an ordinary soldier. His body was found in the evening among piles of corpses, identifiable only by the purple boots he wore. Mehmed II entered Hagia Sophia that historic evening, stood beneath the giant golden dome, prostrated in thanks to God for the victory, and then ordered the church to be converted into a mosque. Constantinople became Istanbul, the capital of the Ottoman Empire and the greatest city in the Islamic world. The conquest of Constantinople was not just a military victory, but a historical transformation. The Ottoman Empire became the supreme Islamic power, the legitimate heir to the Islamic Caliphate. Mehmed II, now known as the Conqueror, became a hero in the eyes of Muslims worldwide. But the conquest also marked the beginning of a new era of challenges. The Ottoman Empire now ruled peoples of different religions, sects, and cultures, from Albanian Muslims in the Balkans to Arabs in Syria and Egypt, Persians in Iraq, and Berbers in North Africa. Managing this immense diversity required wisdom, tolerance, and flexibility. The Ottomans developed a brilliant administrative system called the millet system. Each religious or ethnic community governed itself in internal affairs, while the Ottoman state handled defense, security, taxes, and foreign relations. This system allowed the empire to endure for centuries, while other empires collapsed from internal diversity. Mehmed II did not stop at the conquest of Constantinople, but continued his conquests in the Balkans and Asia Minor. He conquered Serbia, Bosnia, and Albania, reaching the borders of Hungary and Venice, and began expanding eastward toward the Safavid Empire in Persia. Under his rule, the Ottoman Empire became the supreme power in the eastern Mediterranean. Mehmed II became sultan at the age of just 19 in 1451. Everyone underestimated him because of his youth. The Byzantines, the Europeans, and even some Ottoman ministers thought this young man would be nothing more than a puppet in the hands of the Grand Viziers. But they were all wrong. Mehmed II was a rare military and political genius. He spoke 7 languages, studied history, philosophy, mathematics, and engineering, and read the biographies of Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Saladin. But most importantly, he carried in his heart a single dream: the conquest of Constantinople. Bayezid II, the son of Mehmed the Conqueror, focused on consolidating the conquests rather than further expansion. His reign was a period of relative peace and economic prosperity. But the real challenge came with his son, Selim I, who would change the face of the Ottoman Empire forever. Selim I, nicknamed Yavuz, the Stern, ruled for only 8 years, from 1512 to 1520. But these 8 years changed Islamic history. Instead of focusing on Europe like his predecessors, Selim turned south and east toward the Islamic world. This decision was not random, but driven by a real threat to the Ottoman Empire from the east. The Safavid Empire in Persia, led by Shah Ismail, was spreading Shi'ism by force and inciting Shiite minorities within Ottoman lands to rebel. This sectarian threat was more dangerous to the Ottoman state than any external threat. In 1514, Selim led a massive army eastward toward Persia. At the Battle of Chaldiran, he decisively defeated the Safavid army. Shah Ismail barely escaped, but his prestige was shattered, and the Safavid threat was ended for decades to come. Selim annexed eastern Anatolia and Armenia to the empire, securing the eastern borders. But Selim I's greatest achievement was in the south, Egypt. At that time, it was under the rule of the Mamluks, warrior knights of Turkish and Circassian origin who had ruled Egypt and Syria for over 250 years. The Mamluks were fierce warriors, but their weapons and tactics had not evolved since the Middle Ages. In 1516, Selim marched his army from Anatolia to Syria. At the Battle of Marj Dabik near Aleppo, the Ottoman army, armed with cannons and rifles, crushed the Mamluk cavalry, who were still fighting with swords and spears. The Mamluk Sultan Kansu al-Ghuri died in the battle, and all of Syria fell to the Ottomans within weeks. But Selim's real target was Egypt. It was not just a rich province, but the beating heart of the Islamic world. Cairo was the nominal seat of the Abbasid Caliphate, and Al-Azhar was the greatest Islamic university in the world. Whoever controlled Egypt controlled the legitimacy of Islamic leadership. Tumen Bey, the last Mamluk sultan, tried to defend Egypt with desperate bravery, but at the Battle of Ridania near Cairo, the Ottoman army decisively defeated the Mamluks. Tumen Bey was captured and executed, and the Mamluk Empire ended forever. Selim I's entry into Cairo was a historic moment. The Abbasid Caliph al-Mutawakkil, who had been a mere figurehead under Mamluk rule, welcomed the Ottoman Sultan and handed him the keys to the Islamic Caliphate. Selim became not only the Sultan of the Ottomans, but also the Caliph of Muslims and the protector of the 2 holy mosques. This development fundamentally transformed the Ottoman Empire, from a regional Turkish state to the leader of the entire Islamic world. The Hajj to Mecca and Medina came under Ottoman protection, and scholars of Al-Azhar began to mention the Ottoman Sultan in their Friday sermons throughout the Islamic world. Suleiman I, Selim's son, inherited an empire larger and stronger than any Islamic state since the Umayyad Caliphate. Suleiman, who would be known in history as the Lawgiver in the East and the Magnificent in the West, ruled for 46 years, from 1520 to 1566. His reign was the golden age of the Ottoman Empire. Suleiman was an extraordinary figure in every sense, a brave warrior and a military genius, but also a wise legislator and a patron of the arts and sciences. Under his rule, the Ottoman Empire reached its greatest geographical extent and its most glorious cultural and civilizational era. Suleiman's European campaigns were legendary. In 1522, he captured Belgrade, the strategic key to Hungary. In 1526, he besieged Vienna, the capital of the Austrian Empire and the heart of Christian Europe. The siege failed due to the early arrival of winter, and the fierce resistance of the city's inhabitants. But the terror it instilled in Europe was immense. Vienna became the symbol of the ultimate limit of Ottoman expansion in Europe. The European proverb said, "The enemy is at the gates of Vienna," referring to the Ottomans. But Suleiman did not despair and returned to besiege the city a second time, though the result was the same. At sea, the Ottoman fleet, under the command of Hayreddin Barbarossa, dominated the eastern Mediterranean and challenged European naval powers. Barbarossa, who began his life as a pirate in North Africa, became the commander of the Ottoman navy and terrorized European coasts for decades. Under his command, the Ottomans controlled Algeria, Tunisia, and Tripoli, and the Mediterranean became an Ottoman lake. But Suleiman's greatest achievements were not military, but legal and administrative. He completely reorganized Ottoman law and established fair laws for land, taxes, trade, and punishments. These laws, known as the Suleimanic Code, became the foundation of the empire's legal system for centuries and earned him the title the lawgiver. Under Suleiman's rule, Istanbul became the most beautiful city in the world. The architect Sinan, the greatest architect in Islamic history, built hundreds of mosques, bridges, palaces, and baths. The Suleymaniye Mosque, Sinan's masterpiece, became a symbol of Ottoman civilization's grandeur. Its massive dome rivaled Hagia Sophia in beauty, and its 4 minarets pierced Istanbul's sky like golden arrows. The most beautiful story of Suleiman's era was his love for Hürrem Sultan, the Russian slave girl who became his favorite wife and the most powerful woman in the empire. Hürrem, whom Europeans called Roxolana, was not just a beautiful wife, but also a clever political advisor and a patron of charitable works. Her influence on Suleiman was immense, and their love story became a legend in Turkish and European literature. But this great love also brought great tragedy. In her attempt to secure her son, Selim's succession to the throne, Hürrem conspired against Mustafa, Suleiman's eldest son, from another wife. Mustafa was the natural heir to the throne, beloved by the army and the people, and a skilled military leader. But Hürrem convinced Suleiman that Mustafa was plotting to rebel against him. In 1553, Suleiman summoned his son Mustafa to his tent during a military campaign and ordered him strangled before his eyes. This tragic decision, made under the influence of jealousy and blind love, broke Suleiman's heart and weakened the empire. Mustafa was Suleiman's best son and the most qualified to rule, and his death left the empire without a strong heir. After Suleiman's death in 1566, his son Selim II inherited the throne. Selim II, nicknamed the Drunkard because of his alcoholism, was weak and decadent. His reign marked the beginning of the Ottoman Empire's decline. Real power passed to the Grand Viziers, while the Sultan indulged in pleasures and luxury. During Selim II's reign, the naval battle of Lepanto took place in 1571, the first major defeat of the Ottoman fleet by a Christian alliance led by the Spanish, Venetians, and the Pope. This defeat shattered the myth of the Ottoman fleet's invincibility and paved the way for the rise of European naval powers. Murad III, Selim II's son, continued the tradition of weakness and decay. His reign saw the beginning of what was called the Sultanate of Women, where the mothers, wives, and concubines of sultans controlled politics from behind the scenes. The Ottoman palace became a hotbed of intrigue and female power struggles, while the empire faced serious external challenges. Ahmed the Prosper attempted to reform the situation, but his reign saw the first Ottoman peace treaty with Europe on equal terms. The Treaty of Zietwaterock with Austria in 1606, which recognized the Austrian emperor as the Ottoman sultan's equal, not a subordinate. This was a symbol of the end of the era in which the Ottoman Empire was the sole superpower. The succession crisis worsened with the implementation of the Golden Cage system. Instead of sending Ottoman princes to govern provinces and gain experience, they were imprisoned in the palace from birth until death. This system prevented civil wars, but produced weak and ignorant sultans. Osman II attempted to break this pattern. A young, ambitious, and intelligent man, he dreamed of reforming the army and modernizing the empire. But his attempt to abolish the Janissary Corps, which had become a conservative force resisting any change, led to a bloody revolt. The Janissaries killed the Sultan in 1622 in the first assassination of an Ottoman Sultan by his own soldiers. This tragic event showed the extent of the Ottoman system's decay. The army that had once been the greatest military force in the world had become a burden on the state and a source of instability. Murad IV was the last of the great Ottoman sultans. He ruled with an iron fist from 1623 to 1640 and restored some of the empire's former prestige. He suppressed corruption and rebellions and personally led the armies in wars against the Persians, recapturing Baghdad for Ottoman rule. But Murad IV died young without a male heir, and the throne passed to his brother Ibrahim, who had spent his entire life imprisoned in the Golden Cage. Ibrahim, nicknamed the Mad, was mentally unstable and took the empire from enlightened despotism to blind tyranny. His reign saw countless scandals and crises, ending with his deposition and execution by his soldiers in 1648. Mehmed IV, Ibrahim's son, inherited the throne at the age of 6 and ruled for 39 years under the regency of his mother, grandmother, and grand viziers. His reign saw the last major Ottoman expansions, led by the capable ministers of the Köprülü family, the conquest of Crete from Venice after a 24-year war, and the Second Siege of Vienna in 1683, the last Ottoman attempt to expand into Europe. The Ottoman army, led by Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, besieged the city for 2 months. But the arrival of the Polish army, led by King John Sobieski, saved Vienna at the last moment. The Ottoman defeat was crushing and marked the beginning of a series of setbacks that would last for 2 centuries. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 was a turning point in Ottoman history. For the first time, the Ottoman Empire ceded vast territories to its enemies without compensation. Hungary, Transylvania, and most Ottoman territories north of the Danube passed to Austria. The Morea went to Venice, and Azov went to Russia. This treaty ended the era of Ottoman expansion forever, and began the era of gradual decline. The empire that had once dictated terms to Europe now negotiated from a position of weakness. The sick man of Europe, as the Europeans called the Ottoman Empire, began to lose its limbs one by one. Ahmed III attempted to introduce European reforms to the empire during the Tulip era. He sent educational missions to Europe, brought in European experts, and introduced new technologies. But these reforms were met with strong resistance from conservatives and ended with a popular uprising in 1728 that deposed the Sultan. Mahmud IV and later Osman III continued the attempts at reform, but slowly and cautiously. Wars with Russia and Austria continued and defeats mounted. The Treaty of Küçükçay with Russia in 1774 was another disaster. It granted Russia control of the Black Sea and the right to protect Orthodox Christians in the Ottoman Empire. Abdul Hamid faced even greater challenges with the rise of Russia as a great power in the East, and the emergence of nationalist movements in the Balkans. The Greek Revolution, which began in 1821, posed an existential threat to the multi-ethnic empire. European support for the Greek rebels showed that the Ottoman Empire no longer enjoyed international respect. Mahmud II was the last sultan to attempt radical reform of the empire. In 1826, he abolished the Janissary Corps permanently after a bloody massacre known as the Auspicious Incident. This bold decision paved the way for military modernization, but it came too late. Egypt under Muhammad Ali Pasha became quasi-independent. Greece gained its independence, and Algeria fell to France. Abdul Mekid I launched the Tanzimat era, a comprehensive attempt to modernize the empire along European lines. The Imperial Edict of Gülhane in 1839 declared equality for all subjects of the empire regardless of religion or race. This was a revolutionary change, but it came at a time when nationalist movements had already taken deep root. The Crimean War from 1853 to 1856 was the last great Ottoman victory, but it was a victory achieved with British and French help against Russia. The Ottoman Empire was no longer able to defend itself with its own forces, and had to rely on European balances to survive. Abdulaziz attempted to continue the modernization, but mounting debts and continuous military defeats made the situation hopeless. He was deposed in a military coup in 1876, ending the Tanzimat era and bringing Abdul Hamid II to the throne, who ruled for 33 years. Abdul Hamid II, the last of the strong sultans, followed a policy of enlightened despotism. He abolished the constitution, dissolved parliament, and ruled with an iron fist. But he also developed education, transportation, and built the Hijaz Railway. which connected Istanbul to Medina. His slogan was Islamic unity, an attempt to unite Muslims under the Ottoman Caliphate against the European threat. But Abdülhamid II faced challenges no sultan before him had. Nationalist movements spread throughout the empire. Bulgarians, Serbs, Albanians, Arabs, and Armenians all demanded independence or autonomy. European powers exploited these movements to divide the empire and plunder its lands. The Armenian massacres of the 1890s and early 20th century inflicted immense damage on the empire's international reputation. These massacres, which the Ottoman government claimed were responses to Armenian revolts, were seen by Europeans as evidence of the Ottoman system's barbarity and the need for its destruction. The Young Turk Revolution of 1908, led by the Committee of Union and Progress, overthrew Abdülhamid II's absolute rule but could not save the empire. The Balkan Wars from 1912 to 1913 led to the loss of most of the remaining European territories. The empire that had once threatened Vienna had receded to Anatolia and some Arab lands. The Ottoman Empire's entry into World War I, on the side of Germany, was the last attempt to regain past glory. Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Cemal Pasha, who ruled the empire as a dictatorial triumvirate, bet on a German victory to regain lost territories and rebuild Ottoman power. But the war was a total disaster. The Gallipoli Front, where Mustafa Kemal Pasha fought with legendary heroism, was the only victory. On other fronts, defeats mounted. Enver Pasha's disastrous campaign against Russia in Sarıkamış ended with the deaths of 90,000 Ottoman soldiers from cold and hunger. The Great Arab Revolt, led by Sharif Hussein and supported by the British, ended Ottoman rule in the Hijaz and Syria. Worst of all were the Armenian massacres of 1915. Under the pretext that Armenians were collaborating with the enemy Russia, the Ottoman government organized mass killings and deportations that claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of innocent Armenians. This crime against humanity inflicted irreparable moral damage on the empire's reputation. This tragic decision, made under the influence of jealousy and blind love, broke Suleiman's heart and weakened the empire. Mustafa was Suleiman's best son and the most qualified to rule, and his death left the empire without a strong heir. After Suleiman's death in 1566, his son Selim II inherited the throne. Selim II, nicknamed the Drunkard because of his alcoholism, was weak and decadent. His reign marked the beginning of the Ottoman Empire's decline. Real power passed to the Grand Viziers, while the Sultan indulged in pleasures and luxury. During Selim II's reign, the naval battle of Lepanto took place in 1571, the first major defeat of the Ottoman fleet by a Christian alliance led by the Spanish, Venetians, and the Pope. This defeat shattered the myth of the Ottoman fleet's invincibility and paved the way for the rise of European naval powers. When the war ended with the defeat of the Central Powers, the Ottoman Empire was on the brink of total collapse. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 divided the empire's territories among the victors. Greece received Izmir and western Anatolia. Italy received the south. France received the southeastern region. Armenia received the east, and Kurdistan received the southeastern part. Only the poor and mountainous heart of Anatolia remained for the Turks. But here emerged the man who would change the course of Turkish history, Mustafa Kemal Pasha, the hero of Gallipoli. This young officer, who began as an ordinary military commander, carried in his heart a revolutionary vision for Turkey's future, a vision that did not include restoring the Ottoman Empire, but building a modern, secular Turkish state on its ruins. On May 19, 1919, Mustafa Kemal landed in the Black Sea city of Samsun and launched the Turkish War of Independence. He fought on multiple fronts: the Greeks in the west, the Armenians in the east, the French in the south, the British in Istanbul, and even the Ottoman Sultan himself, whom he considered a traitor to the nation. The war lasted 4 years of fierce battles and immense sacrifices. The Battle of Sakarya, which lasted 22 days, was the turning point. Mustafa Kemal, who had granted himself the rank of marshal, personally led the Turkish army and defeated the Greek army, which was on the verge of capturing Ankara, the new capital of the Turkish state. The Battle of Dumlupinar in 1922 was the final blow. The Greek army completely collapsed, and tens of thousands of Greek soldiers were taken prisoner. The Greek commander, General Trikoupis, said to Mustafa Kemal upon surrendering, I hope you are as lucky in peace as you have been in war." Mustafa Kemal replied, "Peace is harder than war." The entry of Turkish forces into Izmir on September 9, 1922, ended the Greek dream in Asia Minor and proved to the world that the Turks would not accept the division of their homeland. The great fire that broke out in the city, with each side blaming the other, symbolized the end of one era and the beginning of another. On November 1, 1922, Mustafa Kemal officially abolished the Sultanate. Abdul Majid II, the last Sultan, became a mere caliph with no political power. On March 3, 1924, the Caliphate was also abolished, and the last Ottoman caliph was exiled from Turkey forever. Thus ended the Ottoman Empire, which had lasted more than 600 years. But its end was not just a collapse, it was a transformation. From the ruins of the old empire, the modern Republic of Turkey was born, led by the man who would later be known as Atatürk, the father of the Turks. Atatürk did not stop at expelling the invaders, but launched a comprehensive social and cultural revolution. He abolished Islamic law, introduced the Swiss Civil Code, banned the veil and fez, forced people to wear European hats, changed the alphabet from Arabic to Latin, prohibited polygamy, and granted women the right to vote and run for office. These radical reforms severed the connection between the new Turkey and its Ottoman past in a sharp and painful way. Ataturk wanted the Turks to forget their imperial past and look toward a European future. His motto was, "Peace at home, peace in the world," a complete reversal of Ottoman expansionist policy. But the Ottoman Empire did not die completely in the collective memory of the peoples it ruled. It left a complex legacy of nostalgia and bitterness. Arabs remember it as the last great Islamic state, but also as a colonial power that suppressed Arab identity. Balkan peoples remember it as a foreign occupier, but also as a period of religious and cultural tolerance. In modern Turkey, the relationship with Ottoman history has gone through different phases. Ataturk and his followers rejected the entire Ottoman past, considering it an era of darkness and backwardness. But over the decades, Turks began to rediscover their imperial history and take pride in the achievements of their Ottoman ancestors. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who has ruled Turkey since the beginning of the 21st century, revived Ottoman symbols and attempted to restore Turkish influence in the Balkans, the Middle East, and North Africa. His ambitious foreign policy, which critics call neo-Ottomanism, reflects a desire to regain the regional status Turkey lost with the empire's collapse. But today's Turkey is not the Ottoman Empire. It is a modern nation-state, a member of NATO, and a candidate for European Union membership, facing the challenges of the 21st century: terrorism, migration, economic crisis, and political polarization. The lessons from Ottoman history are many and varied. First lesson: power does not last forever. The empire that once threatened the heart of Europe became the sick man of Europe within 2 centuries. The reason was not just the weakness of the armies, but the failure to adapt to technological, social, and economic changes. Second lesson: the importance of tolerance and justice in managing diversity. The Ottoman Empire succeeded for centuries in ruling diverse peoples and religions because it granted them relative freedom and justice. When it turned to oppression and discrimination, revolts and secessions began. Third lesson: the danger of stagnation and resistance to change. The Ottoman army, which was the world's greatest military force in the 16th century, became a burden and an obstacle in the 18th century because it refused to modernize and develop. Institutions that do not evolve die, and nations that do not learn perish. Fourth lesson: greatness is not measured only by territory and military power, but also by cultural and civilizational achievements. The Ottoman Empire is remembered today not only for its conquests, but also for Sinan's mosques, Suleiman's laws, its religious tolerance, and its advanced administrative system. Fifth lesson, and perhaps the most important for today's youth: success begins with vision and dreams. Osman I ruled a land no larger than a small city, but his dream was as big as the world. Mehmed the Conqueror was a young man in his 20s, but his belief in his ability to conquer Constantinople made him achieve what his ancestors could not. Vision, determination, and hard work can turn the smallest beginnings into the greatest endings. In today's world, where change is accelerating and challenges are becoming more complex, the story of the Ottoman Empire reminds us that history does not repeat itself, but it does offer lessons. Nations, companies, and individuals who learn from history write the future, while those who ignore it become part of it. Remember that every great empire began with a dream in the heart of one man. Osman, I saw a giant tree shading the world and turned that vision into a reality that lasted 6 centuries. You too have dreams, visions, and the ability to turn them into reality. Do not underestimate small beginnings, for the greatest sultans started as children with dreams. Do not despair at the magnitude of the challenge, for Constantinople was conquered after 1,700 years of attempts. Do not fear calculated risks, for those who changed the world were ready to take risks for their dreams. The Ottoman Empire ended, but the lessons we learned from it remain. Greatness is not inherited but earned. Power is not given but built. And success does not happen by chance but through planning, work, and perseverance. In the heart of each of us is a little Osman dreaming of an empire, a young Suleiman wanting to be just and strong, and a Mehmed the Conqueror striving to achieve the impossible. The difference between dreamers and achievers is not the size of their dreams, but their willingness to work for them. When you wake up tomorrow, remember that history is not written only in palaces and thrones, but in hearts that carry great dreams, minds that plan to achieve them, and hands that work to build them. Each of us can build our own empire, whether in work, family, society, or even in self-development. The night is quiet around you now, and the stars in the sky remind you that the universe is vast and the possibilities are endless. Breathe deeply and let the story of the Ottoman Empire carry you to peaceful dreams. Dreams full of hope and ambition. Dreams that remind you that tomorrow is a new day full of opportunities to build something great. Good night.